also seemed at home and buzzed about me as I sat sketching and enjoying my bear interview now it was over. I wonder what draws houseflies so far up in the mountains. Heavy, gross feeders as they are, sensitive to cold and fond of domestic ease, how have they been distributed from continent to continent, across seas and deserts and mountain chains, usually so influential in determining boundaries of species both of plants and animals? Beetles and butterflies are sometimes restricted to small areas. Each mountain in a range, and even the different zones of a mountain, may have its own peculiar species. But the housefly seems to be everywhere. I wonder if any island in mid-ocean is flyless. The bluebottle is abundant in these Yosemite woods, ever ready with his marvellous store of eggs to make all dead flesh fly. Bumblebees are here, and are well fed on boundless stores of nectar and pollen. The honeybee, though abundant in the foothills, has not yet got so high. It is only a few years since the first swarm was brought to California. A queer fellow and a jolly fellow is the grasshopper. Up the mountains he comes on excursions, how high I don't know, but at least as far and high as Yosemite tourists. I was much interested with the hearty enjoyment of the one that danced and sang for me on the dome this afternoon. He seemed brimful of glad, hilarious energy, manifested by springing into the air to a height of 20 or 30 feet, then diving and springing up again, and making a sharp musical rattle just as the lowest point in the descent was reached. Up and down a dozen times he danced and sang, then alighted to rest, then up and at it again. The curves he described in the air in diving and rattling resembled those made by cords hanging loosed and attached at the same height at the ends, the loops nearly covering each other. Braver, heartier, keener, carefree enjoyment of life I have never seen or heard in any creature, great or small. The life of this comic Redlegs, the mountain's merriest child, seems to be made up of pure condensed gaiety. The Douglas squirrel is the only creature that I can compare with him in exuberant, rollicking, irrepressible jollity. Wonderful that these sublime mountains are so loudly cheered and brightened by a creature so queer. Nature in him seems to be snapping her fingers in the face of all earthly dejection and melancholy with a boyish hip hip hurrah. How the sound is made I do not understand. When he was on the ground he made not the slightest noise, nor when he was simply flying from place to place, but only when diving in curves, the motion seeming to be required for the sound. For the more vigorous the diving, the more energetic the corresponding outbursts of jolly rattling. I tried to observe him closely while he was resting in the intervals of his performances, but he would not allow a near approach, always getting his jumping legs ready to spring for immediate flight, and keeping his eye on me. A fine sermon the little fellow danced for me on the dome. A likely place to look for sermons in stones, but not for grasshopper sermons. A large and imposing pulpit for so small a preacher. No danger of weakness in the knees of the world while nature can spring such a rattle as this. Even the bear did not express for me the mountain's wild health and strength and happiness so telling as did this comical little hopper. No cloud of care in his day, no winter of discontent in sight. To him every day is a holiday, and when at length his sun sets, I fancy he will cuddle down on the forest floor and die, like the leaves and flowers, and like them leave no unsightly remains calling for burial. Sundown, and I must decamp. Good night, friends three, brown bear, rugged boulder of energy in groves and gardens, fair as Eden, restless, fussy fly, with gauzy wings stirring the air all around the world, and grasshopper, crisp, electric spark of joy, enlivening the massy sublimity of the mountains like the laugh of a child. Thank you, all three, for your quickening company. Heaven guide every wing and leg. Good night, friends three. Good night. July 22. A fine specimen of the black-tailed deer went bounding past camp this morning. A buck with wide spread of antlers, showing admirable vigour and grace. Wonderful the beauty and strength and graceful movements of animals in wildernesses, cared for by nature only, when our experience with domestic animals would lead us to fear that all the so-called neglected wild beasts would degenerate. Yet the upshot of nature's method of breeding and teaching seems to lead to excellence of every sort. Deer, like all wild animals, are as clean as plants. The beauty of their gestures and attitudes, alert or in repose, surprise yet more than their bounding, exuberant strength. Every movement and posture is graceful, the very poetry of manners and motion. Mother Nature is too often spoken of as, in reality, no mother at all. Yet how wisely, sternly, tenderly she loves and looks after her children in all sorts of weather and wildernesses. The more I see of deer, the more I admire them as mountaineers. They make their way into the heart of the roughest solitudes with smooth reserve of strength, through dense belts of brush and forest encumbered with fallen trees and boulder piles, across canyons, roaring streams and snowfields, ever showing forth beauty and courage. Over nearly all the continent the deer find homes. In the Florida savannas and hummocks, in the Canada woods, in the far north, roaming over mossy tundras, swimming lakes and rivers and arms of the sea from island to island, washed with waves, or climbing rocky mountains, everywhere healthy and able, adding beauty to every landscape, a truly admirable creature and great credit to nature. Have been sketching a silver fir that stands on a granite ridge a few hundred yards to the eastward of camp. A fine tree with a particular snowstorm story to tell. It is about 100 feet high, growing on bare rock, thrusting its roots into a weathered joint less than an inch wide and bulging out to form a base to bear its weight. The storm came from the north while it was young, and broke it down nearly to the ground, as is shown by the old dead weather-beaten top leaning out from the living trunk built up from a new shoot below the break. The annual rings of the trunk that have overgrown the dead sapling tell the year of the storm. Wonderful that a side branch, forming a portion of one of the level collars that encircle the trunk of this species, Abies magnifica, should bend upward, grow erect, and take the place of the lost axis to form a new tree. Many others, pines as well as firs, bear testimony to the crushing severity of this particular storm. Trees, some of them 50 to 75 feet high, were bent to the ground and buried like grass, whole groves vanishing as if the forest had been cleared away, leaving not a branch or needle visible until the spring thaw. Then the more elastic, undamaged saplings rose again, aided by the wind, some reaching a nearly erect attitude, others remaining more or less bent, while those with broken backs endeavoured to specialise a side branch below the break and make a leader of it to form a new axis of development.